and I had just gotten back from school, and I heard my older brother talking, and he was talking to his parents, and I couldn't really make out what they were saying. I had been adopted by this family. It was my aunt and my uncle, and I had only lived there a couple of years. And in my mind and in my heart, I was going to go back and I was going to live with my mother when she got it together. The end of that conversation, what had happened is that my mother had been diagnosed with HIV. And at that time, it was little known, and there was a really, really high mortality rate. And I would go and I would visit her, and it became evident to me that I was going to lose my mother and that I wasn't going to, stay with her. She had contracted AIDS, HIV from contaminated heroin needles. And so she decided to turn her life around. She recovered from her drug addiction. She joined a 12-step program and tried to make the rest of her life worth living. And I would have sporadic visits with her, and towards the end, there was this funny smell that always came from her back room. And I wasn't really sure what it was. But then I discovered it was marijuana. Was my mom still sober? Could she still consider herself a recovered drug addict? I didn't know. But today I know that my mom died sober, that there are medical uses for marijuana. It helped her to eat. It relieved her pain. It took away the nausea. And when my mother died, she died a recovered addict. Fast forward to the year that she died, I was 15 years old, and I had never really tried using any sort of alcohol or drugs, or I wasn't really into a party scene. But for some reason, when I found out she died, I started smoking marijuana. I started smoking it every day. I would leave school. I was a straight A student. I would go home at lunch. I would smoke marijuana. I would eat some sort of munchy food, and I would fall asleep. And I did this for 45 days straight. I hated it. I didn't like the way that it made me feel. I didn't like the way that I felt the next morning when I woke up, but I couldn't stop doing it. So many people say that marijuana isn't addictive, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but let me tell you, I hated it and I could not stop. I didn't know why I was doing it. I know today that I was doing it because I was trying to drown feelings. My mom had just died, and I didn't understand why, and I just wanted to not feel. Eventually, my personal story is that I moved on to drinking and to different drugs, and I developed my own habit, which I've been in recovery from for 10 years. But when I look back, and I remember the messages I was told, is that marijuana isn't a drug, it's natural. It's not addictive. There was no harm there. I'm here to tell you that there was harm. It significantly changed that experience for me. I didn't feel it, I didn't experience it, and I can't go back. It profoundly altered my perception of that loss. So today I'm here to talk to you about the reasons to keep marijuana use for recreational reasons illegal. There's a big question, can you use it for medical uses? Well, there's a lot of different information on that. This brings into account the FDA. So the FDA decides what we can use responsibly, what we can use legally to treat medical things. But even if you look at that, there's drugs for pain, there's drugs for narcolepsy, there's drugs for convulsions and seizures. All of those highly addictive. All of those very damaging. What makes those okay? What makes those approved in medical marijuana taboo? Well, the biggest difference I can tell you is that in the FDA, what they do is extensive testing, and they also have plans in place to control the manufacturing, the level of standards, the places that these drugs are made and how they're distributed is all regulated. Medical marijuana is not. It's basically grown and then given and sold under the guise of being used as medical marijuana. And for 10% of the people that have medical marijuana cards, they actually have a medical reason for it. 90% of the people in America who have medical marijuana cards have this innocuous, random, hard to tell, can't quantify condition of chronic pain. So basically I can say, I have a headache every day. I can go to my doctor and say, I have a headache and Tylenol isn't helping. I have a headache, I have a headache, I have a headache, and I'll get a medical marijuana card. I do that long enough and I can get approved to grow my own medical marijuana. The reason I know this is because that's what my husband did. My husband, before he got sober, got a medical marijuana card. Him and his wife sold medical marijuana out of their home with their 2 children. He then set up a hydroponic growing place where they increased the potency of this drug and sold it out of their home legally under the guise of government-sanctioned medical marijuana. In practicing this preparation, my audience was my husband, and it was very difficult because given everything that we've learned and everything we've experienced today, he is still for the legalization of marijuana. And I'm kind of on the fence, and I'll tell you why. I'm not completely against the legalization of it at some point in the future, but there's a long way that we need to go between now and there. The number one factor, the number one reason why I feel it shouldn't be legalized is not because of crime. It's not because of the budget and the taxes and the money. Honestly, I don't care about that. That's bigger problems for bigger people. What I'm concerned about are my kids. What I'm concerned about are your kids. There have been numerous studies that show the effects of marijuana smoke on the brains of adolescents and teenagers are devastating. It's also been conclusively proven that those effects are negated as you become an adult. So there's been a lot of studies done, and I don't want to use the podium. So 2 of the main parts of the marijuana plant that are psychotropic are THC and cannabinoid. So cannabinoid can actually be put into pill form, and it can be given to cancer patients, AIDS patients, glaucoma patients, patients who really need that sort of treatment. And then there's THC, and THC is and cannabinoid together can permanently change the shape of your child's brain. And this isn't people who smoke every day or large quantities or in different methods, because as some of you may not know, you can now smoke it like you usually did. You can put it into a pipe and smoke it. You can put it into a water bong and smoke it. You can put it into a vaporizer and smoke it. They now have oils. They now have enhanced edibles, which has 10 times the amount of THC as regular, naturally grown marijuana. There was a study that showed it can be useful in reducing pain and inflammation, controlling epileptic seizures, and possibly even treating mental illness and addictions. However, if it is legalized, marijuana use would increase and addiction rates would increase, especially among our youth. And to prove this, I'm going to bring you to some statistics from Colorado, where some of you may not know, but it has been legalized for recreational use in Colorado. And there's a lot of mixed statistics. It's going to depend on who's actually putting these out. But what we have found is that in the past year, the use has gone up in the ages of 12 and above significantly. So the US average has gone up 1% from 11.8 to 12.3. But the use in this age group in Colorado, you notice here it was 11.8 and here it was 16.2 in Colorado. In the last year it went up to 18.9%. And that's a lot. There's a lot more statistics, and I don't have time to tell you all of them, but one that I found was very interesting, and this is something that you may not think about. If you legalize marijuana and you have some in your drawer, you use it just like you would pull out and use a bottle of wine, no problem. Your 3-year-old stumbles into your room, accidentally gets into your drawer, and accidentally ingests copious amounts of this drug. So the accidental ingestion rate for ages 3 to 7 went from 4 years old total in the years of 2008 to 2011. So that's 1 kid a year for those 4 years. Since legalization, it's gone up to 14 just in part of that year, because it's now being left out and readily available for younger children. A 2014 National Institute on Drug Abuse report announced the results of a long-term study conducted by Duke University. People who began smoking marijuana heavily in their teens lost an average of 8 points in IQ between age 13 and age 38. Importantly, lost cognitive abilities were not fully restored in those who quit smoking marijuana as adults. Finally, besides the medical and the physical repercussions of this, one of the biggest issues I have is driving safety. So 3.5 weeks ago now, my husband was in a 4-car pileup on the road. He watched a woman driving erratically, moved over to be away from her, turned around, and 30 seconds later was smacked by this woman. 2 cars behind her, smack, smack, 4 people injured. He himself went through the windshield. His passenger got out of the car, saw that the woman who had hit him was screaming and crying, opened the door to help her, and there was a baby in the back seat. But more shocking was the puff of smoke that opened and came out of that door. This woman, who had a medical marijuana card, had been smoking marijuana in the car with her child. Now, whether it was the fact that it altered her state of mind, or maybe she just couldn't figure out how to smoke and drive at the same time, but either way, people were injured. That child was injured, and my husband was injured. Alcohol is legal. There are strict ways that we can tell if you have been drinking relatively close to the time that you were involved in a traffic accident. There's no way to tell that with marijuana. You could have smoked marijuana 3 weeks ago, got into a car accident, and tested positive for it. How can we tell? Unless someone specifically saw you smoking marijuana while driving, we can't tell if that's what caused the accident. Therefore, there can be no repercussions. There's absolutely no way to protect ourselves, our children, and the general public from those people who are severely altered by this drug. So I propose that until more studies are done and we can fully educate ourselves and our children on the devastating, harmful repercussions of this illness, of this substance, and until we can better test with precise accuracy the amount of drugs used prior to an accident or a death, then it should remain illegal. Thank you.